Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, host Casey Hentges plants tomatoes in our conditioned straw bale bed. We enjoy the beautiful spring blooms of deciduous magnolias. And we explore the extensive orchid collection of former OSU horticulture professor Doug Needham.
So it's been 2 weeks since we started conditioning our straw bale garden, and that included every other day putting a high nitrogen fertilizer and every day watering our straw bales so that we started to break down that carbon material that composes our straw. So now at this point we have peaked in our temperature and it's cooled off, and so we're ready to start planting our tomatoes. And really you can plant a lot of different things in straw bales, but again we've just chosen to plant some tomatoes in ours here. When it comes time to plant your straw bales, there's actually 2 different methods you can use. If your straw bales are all pushed together, you can do what's called the flat method, and that's where you put about 2 to 3 inches of soil across the top of it and then just plant in it as if you were planting in the garden soil. We're actually going to use a different method called the pocket method, and this requires a little bit less soil or potting media, whichever you're using. So what we're going to do is we've got to make pockets in our straw bales to do this. So again, you can see we had our straw bales up on end, and so we're just going to use our trowel to kind of dig in there. Because we're planting tomatoes that prefer a spacing of about 2 feet, we're going to be able to plant 2 tomatoes per bale. So we're going to create 2 pockets on either end of our bales of straw. So you can see we've dug out some of our straw and created little holes or pockets in our straw bales. So we're going to add a little bit of potting soil in there just to, again, give those plants something to kind of root into. But eventually the plant's going to really root into the straw bale itself. Now, we're planting a couple of different sizes of plants here. You might remember that we started these transplants in the greenhouse, and some are still in a 6-inch or a 6-pack pot, and some we've potted up into 4-inch. Now, the nice thing about a smaller transplant is it's easier to put in the pocket, obviously. You could, depending on what crop you were growing, you could just start by planting a seed straight into the straw bale as well. And some people say that that actually works better because it allows that seed from germination to begin growing into the straw. But transplants obviously are the way to go when you're looking at tomatoes. So we've got 2 varieties of tomatoes that are, again, all America selections that we're going to be planting. We've got one that's called Candyland, and then also one that's called Valentine. And we've chosen these 2 to use in our straw bales because they're both small tomatoes. Candyland is a currant type tomato, which means it's going to be a little bit smaller than a cherry tomato. And it has a really nice deep red color to it, and it's also a very sweet flavor. Valentine is also a small tomato, but it's more of a grape type tomato, so it's going to have a little bit more of an oval shape to the tomato. It has, again, a deep red look to it, but it's going to have a bit more of a meaty texture to it, almost like a Roma tomato. But both of them are really good, and the reason why I've chosen, again, these 2 particular ones for our straw bale gardens is because they both prefer a spacing of about 2 feet. They are indeterminate, and they're going to get taller, about 6 feet tall, so we're going to need to stake them eventually. But with cherry or currant or grape type tomatoes, a lot of times the harvesting can be the nuisance because there's more to harvest. And so at least by elevating them in this raised bed, they're going to be more in your face and easier to harvest, or maybe pick as you're walking by to just pop one in your mouth. The Candyland variety is actually touted as having more of the fruit on the outside of the shrub or the vine, so it's also easier to harvest that way. So we're going to put both Candyland and Valentine in our straw bales. And again, with a 6-pack here, you can see that we're talking about a much smaller root ball there, and so we'll just be able to plant that right in there. Again, with tomatoes, if you're new to planting tomatoes, you don't have to plant them at the same height that they were in the original container. You can actually plant them a little bit deeper. That's a lot of times important to do in Oklahoma winds if they're tall and leggy. It gives them a little bit more stability. So that's all we're going to do. If you wanted to, you could add a little mulch, again, just to put some of that straw back around them to cover them. And of course, we're going to water these in when we get them all planted. For more information about how to start and grow in straw bales, check out this fact sheet. This is one of our fabulous trees that announce that spring is here. This is Magnolia excellentiana, or also known as the saucer magnolia. And it's just one of many deciduous magnolias that is proven to do well in Oklahoma. There's also Magnolia stellata that does well in Oklahoma. And many deciduous magnolias also are available that bloom in various colors from pink and cream to white, red, and even purple. There's even a yellow blooming deciduous magnolia. Now, this collection of magnolias do well in moist, rich soils, but are somewhat adaptable. They also come in a range of sizes from something that might be considered more of a shrub to something like this that's much taller and a tree form. Now, the thing about these magnolias, while they're beautiful and they really show off this time of year, is they often are blooming at that time of year where we can get a late freeze. So you might be cautious and not plant it on something that's south-facing where they'll bloom prematurely. In fact, it's actually best to put them on a north-facing wall or the side of the house so that they stay dormant just a little bit longer to protect them from any of those late freezes, so you can enjoy this beautiful display a little longer. Today we're very excited to be in the home greenhouse of someone who I really know and enjoy being around, Dr. Doug Needham, who was a former professor at OSU and my former advisor. So I learned a lot from you over the years, and you really established my career, so I appreciate all of that.
Thank you, Casey. It's great to have you here.
Well,
very special to have you. And with our long history together at OSU as well as at Longwood.
Yes, yeah, and you were at Longwood right after I left my graduate school there.
That's right.
So we just missed each other there, but you're back in Stillwater.
Yes.
And you have a beautiful home greenhouse that we just wanted to show off a little bit. Orchids is kind of a passion of yours?
It is. I got bit by the orchid bug when I was about 13.
Okay.
And my grandmother gave me one of her orchids. She was from Florida. And as you can tell, I never recovered.
Yeah.
I'm still suffering from this affliction of orchids.
And there's so much to learn about orchids. I mean, you can't ever stop, right?
No, and that's been really a lot of fun now that I'm retired, is learning about these different types of orchids and the different cultures that cultural care that they need. You know, some of them that we're very accustomed to, like the Phalaenopsis that many people have in their homes, they're well adapted to a home because it's a warm growing orchid. But there are others that need cooler temperatures or even really cold temperatures.
And that's why you have a divided greenhouse,
That's right. So this is the warm zone.
Okay.
And so it maintains about a 60-degree Fahrenheit minimum nighttime temperature, and then it goes up to 85 in the day, vents open and maintains that 80, 85 degree temperature.
Well, it looks like you know what you're doing. We've got a few here blooming that just look, I mean, they're just gorgeous when they're blooming.
Well, they are, and that's, one of the things about orchids is that they tend to flower, for the most part, only about once a year.
Okay.
And so you go through a lot of green phase
Yeah.
to wait for these gorgeous blossoms.
But once they do, they bloom for
aren't
a
they
while.
Spectacular? But orchids are epiphytes.
Right, so they grow in trees. They're used to having...
They do. Normally they would grow up in the branches of trees. They're not parasites. Sometimes people mistakenly think that they're removing nutrients and invading that tree, but no, they're not. They're just holding on to it.
They're hugging the tree.
They're tree huggers,
Yeah.
that's right. And so they hold on to that tree and they get their moisture then from the fog, from the rain that passes through. And so we typically grow them in a bark-based mix.
Okay.
Now it varies on the particular orchid what the mix is, but typically it is just, as you can see here,
Yeah.
chunks of bark.
Yeah. Because you don't want a lot of moisture up around those
No.
roots because that could lead to rot.
And that is one of the most difficult situations, I think, for the typical homeowner, is not keeping them too wet.
Right.
Because the thought is, well, they look so dry, they need to be watered. No,
Yeah.
they don't. They're epiphytes.
Yeah.
They're air lovers. They want to be exposed to air. So lots of air movement. High humidity is good. So in here, it's about 85% humidity right now. And so they like that heavy humidity and air movement.
Okay, all right. So let's take a look at a couple others that you have here.
Well, maybe we want to take a look here at the Vandas, talking about humidity and air movement.
And epiphytes, yeah.
Because,
look at the roots on those.
You look at these, and there's absolutely no potting medium on this at all. Lift this one down because it has a flower spike on it.
I mean, it's so architectural just seeing the roots too.
It is, and
sculptural.
You can see what's called velamen. This white coating is a spongy layer on the root, and it absorbs moisture from the air. So if the fog happens to turn on, it gets bathed in that fog. But also when I water it, then I literally just hold it down here and mist the roots until they turn green.
Okay.
And so that's maybe 4, 5, 6 waterings until they turn green, and then I just hang it back up.
And I see a little flower.
Yeah, isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
So that's the flower spike that's just forming in this Vanda.
So if somebody had something like this in a home situation that, most people don't have a setup like this, could they put it in the shower and shower it off that way? And
Right, absolutely.
let it drain thoroughly?
Yeah, one cautionary note would be if the homeowner has a water softener.
Oh, okay.
Soft water and plants are not a good combination.
Okay.
Because a water softener is replacing calcium and magnesium with sodium.
Yeah.
And sodium is toxic to plants, whereas calcium and magnesium are secondary macronutrients. They
Okay.
need that.
Okay.
So you never want to use softened water on any of your
Okay.
plants.
Good to know.
But otherwise, yes, you could take it to the shower, use your personal shower to rinse it off, or hold it by the nozzle, or maybe take it to the kitchen sink and use the spray there at the kitchen sink to rinse it off.
And I know a lot of people say the bathroom, if you have a kind of a window in your bathroom, that might be a good spot because of the humidity?
The higher humidity, right. So any place in the home that has a little higher humidity will certainly help.
Okay.
But you're probably not going to have
Enough.
85%
Quite
humidity
enough.
anywhere in the home.
And then, of course, behind us here, we have our classic Phalaenopsis that everybody sees now at
Yeah.
grocery stores and stuff. So,
Phalaenopsis have just skyrocketed in popularity because they are a fairly easy care orchid. And I think I mentioned earlier, they're well adapted to the home environment.
Right.
They would like a little more humidity than what's in most homes, but they'll tolerate the typical humidity in a home. They like that warm temperature. They do need to drop down to about 68 degrees at night in order to initiate the flowers,
Oh,
the
okay.
flower spikes. So that's one thing that the homeowner does need to keep in mind, that if they're maintaining their home in the winter and it's in the
If you keep
72,
your house
74,
warmer.
it may be too warm and they not generate the flower spikes. But if they'll put it, if there's maybe a cooler windowsill, somewhere it'll get that about 68 degrees, bingo.
Okay.
Flower spikes will be initiated. So you can see all of these are in spike.
They look beautiful. So let's head over to the other side of the greenhouse and take a look at some of the cooler
Sure,
orchids.
yeah, go get chilly.
Yes.
All right.
Dr. Needham's definitely cooler in this side of the greenhouse.
Yes. You wish you had a coat on in here.
So we've got some more orchids in here, obviously, and these are different ones. So can you tell us what we're looking at a little bit?
Absolutely. So these are orchids, many of them that would have come from high elevations in the mountains.
Okay.
In fact, many of these are from the Andes, so down in South America, Colombia, Ecuador areas. And so they need to be really cool. And so when I say that, that's 45 degree
Which you don't
night
associate
temperature. No,
with orchids typically,
that's right.
but
People
that high
think
altitude.
because of the altitude.
Okay.
So this house is at 45 degree nighttime with a 65 degree high in the daytime.
Okay.
And so they love this, really cool, and because they're from those high mountainous areas, they also like high humidity.
Okay.
So it's about 95% humidity in here.
Which makes it feel a little chillier.
Yeah,
actually.
it does. And so I have it set so that the fog comes on for about an hour and a half in the morning to maintain that 95 to 99% humidity. And that simulates the real early morning cloud cover that would come into the cloud forest of the Andes.
Okay.
And I think they're liking it.
They seem to be doing really well. We've got some that, so are these, you mentioned these were in a dormant period.
That's right. So that's the other thing about some of these orchids are from parts of the world that experience monsoonal rains.
Okay.
And after that, then they go through a dry phase. And so that's what they need to experience, that dry phase, in order to initiate the flowers.
So it's a little bit of a shift in your thinking. Here we base our seasons off of temperature.
Right.
But in the south, in the tropics, it's based off of the rain season.
That's right. And so these are going through a dry phase. They still have real high humidity, but I only water them maybe once a month. And so I'll water just to keep these pseudobulbs from shrinking too much. So you can see the little bit of wrinkling in that pseudobulb. That's about right. That's what you want. Okay. And in fact, if we look on this one right here, see that little bump right there?
Is that a flower bud?
That's a flower bud, yeah.
Okay. Right.
So here the flower buds are just beginning to develop. So coming probably in a couple months' time, these will have flower buds all over them and be in bloom.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned pseudobulbs. Now, we often hear bulbs, and especially this time of year, we're thinking about our bulbs coming up. Pseudo meaning they're fake, they're not true bulbs.
That's right, pseudo means false bulb. And so these are an above ground structure. They're not really bulbs, but they're kind of like that in the sense that during the growing season, the orchid is storing water and nutrients, carbohydrates in that pseudobulb for the winter phase, and then for producing the gorgeous flowers that we want.
So it kind of acts as the same structure as a bulb.
It does, right. But it's not an underground structure such as these paper whites that are underground true
I thought
bulbs.
I smelled something in
Ah, yes.
So do all orchids have pseudobulbs?
They do not.
Okay.
Great question. So for example, these mastivalias that are right here and the Draculas that are hanging, they do not have pseudobulbs. Okay. And so that tells us a little bit about their cultural requirements. So with a pseudobulb, it's storing that water, can survive a droughty period. These would not survive a droughty period at all. The root systems need to remain moist on the mastivalias and the Draculas, and so they get watered typically every day. Now when it's gloomy, like today, I don't water. No. But otherwise, they would be getting water every day to always keep that root moist.
And let me just guess why this is called Dracula.
Yeah, isn't this fun? So notice these are all in hanging baskets,
Yeah.
and it's because they produce the flower spikes down, and so they grow out of the basket. And I'll try and tip this up here so you can see that fabulous face of the Dracula. So this is Dracula hertzii.
Wow. And it's got several coming on there?
It does. It has some older ones, and there's a new bud right there. There's a brand new growth right there. So it has several, and I see some beginning to stick out of the baskets on these other Draculas.
I think we often think that orchids need indirect bright light, but that's not always the case.
Depends on the orchid.
Okay.
That's right. So these that are growing on this side, for example, you notice I don't have anything hanging over them.
Right.
So if it were a sunny day, they'd be bathed in gorgeous sunshine, and that's what they want. They want that higher light.
So it's not accidental that you have ferns hanging
That's
over these.
right. But the Masdevallias and the Draculas and the Miltoniopsis, they all want a shadier condition, and the Draculas, an especially shady condition.
Okay.
And so I use potted ferns, hanging basket ferns, and I just divided these last month. So because they were huge and didn't need that much shade this time of year. So I essentially cut them into quarters, and each of these baskets is now a quarter of what it was.
Wow.
And so it's providing just the right amount of shade during this low light period of the year. But by the time we get into late spring, early summer, they'll be back to their massive cells, and they'll be providing the shade that I need.
The ferns seem to be enjoying this climate as well.
They are. They're doing real well.
Are all orchids epiphytes, or are there some terrestrial orchids as well?
That's right. That's right. So some are epiphytes, clearly,
Right.
like we saw in the other house, the Vandas. No soil
we have
around them
native
at all.
orchids here in Oklahoma that are terrestrial.
That's right, absolutely. A great example of a terrestrial orchid are the cymbidiums.
Oh.
And so we have some beautiful cymbidiums down here at the other end of the house. And the cymbidiums, while they're in a bark-based mix, they are kept a little more moist because they are accustomed to actually growing down in the soil.
And they're usually in a bigger pot because they're a bigger plant.
Cymbidiums are some of the largest
beautiful.
orchids, and spectacular, huge blossoms on them.
Wow.
And so they need these cool temperatures in order to trigger the floral initiation. This yellow one that's in flower right now, of course, is one of the earliest ones to bloom, and you can see then the one next to it is probably about a month away from opening. And then all these others have flower spikes coming on them. Some are just beginning, others you can see the buds showing back there. And so they'll be flowering throughout the winter and spring.
Okay. Well, Dr. Needham, it's beautiful in here. It smells delicious, and I think you're going to have quite the floral display throughout the year. We appreciate you sharing this with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Casey. It's great to have you here. And yes, we get to enjoy these fabulous flowers and the great fragrances.
Thank you.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. next week, we build a concrete block planter that doubles as a decorative garden bench. We tour a beautiful and productive home garden in Tulsa. And Casey plants warm season crops in the vegetable garden. We hope you join us then for more TV You'll Grow to Love. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanical Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shop, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and the Tulsa Garden Club.